Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 1010 webinar that will be about the CEN-CENELEC copyright policy. As usual, I would like to inform you that you are all muted this morning during the presentation, but you have the possibility to enter your questions in the Q&A panel of the GoToMeeting control panel. Should you be on Twitter, you're also, of course, free to tweet about this webinar with the hashtag 1010webinar. So please let me give the floor to the speaker of today. Spiro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els, and thank you everybody for joining us today. This is a very interesting part for the CEN European standards. We receive often questions about this, and we are involved also with various individuals and organizations to provide information and guidance, and also address specific requests which they may have with regard to the CEN-CENELEC copyright policy. So we will try today to go through the part which relates to the copyright of the CEN-CENELEC IPR policy, and we'll try to provide information, and starting from the first phases of how the copyrights are established in the CEN-CENELEC system, so that you will be able also to get an understanding of how things work. So at the beginning, we will try to go through and give you some information to understand what are intellectual property rights, and particularly copyrights, how the copyrights of the European standards in the CEN-CENELEC system are established. We will try to go on more specific issues, particularly with regard to questions we often receive concerning terms and definitions, graphs, and other parts of standards, and whether these are protected under copyrights. Further, we will go through the aspect of the fair use, the fair practice, which is included in the CEN-CENELEC policy, how that works, and how specific requests can be addressed. Another issue as well, which we're going to discuss, is with regard to the way to handle IPR in subcontracted works in the CEN-CENELEC system, how you should handle aspects which may arise with regard to the IPR ownership, essentially when work is being subcontracted to other organizations in the CEN-CENELEC system. Finally, very important will be to consider also the dissemination of the final deliverables, how standards essentially are being made available to the users, where they can get the standards from, and how the system operates, and the essential elements and benefits of the system. The role of CCMC is also very important, and some final considerations which we will go through. We will go through this presentation. Of course, it would have been very nice to have a more interactive approach. A physical event would have been also much easier to discuss. However, considering the framework and the way that this is organized, at the end of the webinar, we will provide the opportunity for you to address specific aspects. In the meantime, while I am going through the specific elements, you can still raise some questions which are being tabled, and at the end of the webinar, we will collect these questions and we will reply to those individually as they may arise. So please, if you have any questions already while I'm going through the material, submit them, and then we will discuss them later at the end. Okay, so going through the CEN-CENELEC copyright policy. So the Bible, if I may say, of in the CEN-CENELEC system with regard to copyrights and the dissemination of CEN-CENELEC standards is the CEN-CENELEC Guide 10, which is a policy on the dissemination, sales, and copyright of the CEN-CENELEC publications. This is available from the CEN-CENELEC website. You can find it there yourself, so you can download it, have a look. This is for the purpose of transparency, to ensure that the relevant information are available there. However, it is important here to distinguish that this guide provides some essential principles for the protection of the standards and their dissemination, sales, and copyright. So it is not going on detail with regard to commercial practice. The reason is because CEN and CENELEC themselves do not sell standards. The standards are being distributed and sold by the CEN members at national level. Therefore, The CEN members at national level have their own policies and practices on the way that they distribute the standards with regard to specific details, the licensing, for example, of the standards and the pricing. This is not decided at CEN and CENELEC level, essentially. However, what is being described in the CEN and CENELEC guide is some essential principles in order to establish the copyrights and to protect it. And then all the CEN and CENELEC members and partners who are cooperating with CEN and CENELEC also abide by the same principles. So, as I mentioned, we will go through specifically the copyrights of the CEN and CENELEC standards. We will describe how to establish the copyright, how this is being transferred, the exploitation rights, how they're being transferred to CEN and CENELEC and to the members, and how to protect and enforce the copyrights. So, establishing the copyright claim. First of all, it's important to understand what is a copyright. There is also sometimes confusion because also there are different legal frameworks in various countries. So let's go first of all. So copyright, and there is an international agreement with regard to this aspect, and copyright is defined as the exclusive temporary right. So it's usually the life of the author plus 50 or 70 years, which is granted by law to the author or creator of an original work, including the right to copy, distribute, and adapt the work. So essentially, copyright is a right which is granted by the law to the author of a work, because this work is considered to be original. It has some creative content inside, and based on this, the law grants the right to this author of the work, of the content, to be able to protect it and to be able to authorize or not anyone from the copying, the distribution, and adaptation, so the change of the work itself. Now, what does it mean original? Original is a very kind of vague word which often creates troubles even at courts to define exactly if a work is original or not. So, original work is a work which creates some creative content. So, it is something which creates, which includes some creative work, some inspiration from an author, for example. So it means could be a textual work, could be a graphic, could be a plastic, musical, dramatic, audio, or visual creation. So with in comparison with the patents, where the requirements are even more strict, in the case of the patents, they are only granted by law where nothing similar exists in this domain. So it has to be innovative in that case. This is not the same in the copyrights area, where in the copyrights, anything that could be creative can be granted protection on the copyright. So it could be similar with something else. However, if it has something additionally creative as a content, then this is being protected by the law. And the reason for the protection is because the law has considered there is a reason to grant these rights in order to allow the creator of the work to exploit the work that he or she has created. And the reason for that is because there is, in fact, a reason to incentivize the authors to create works, for example, books, could be films, movies, and the ability to also exploit this commercially later in order to be rewarded for such creative work. So these rights, which are granted to the author by the law, are called the exploitation rights, and they're very fundamental with that regard. Now, the social question comes to the play. Are the CEN and CENELEC standards or other technical documents, publications protected by copyrights? And the answer to that is yes, they are being protected as copyrights, and we will explain how this is being established. So, in the case of the CEN and CENELEC, the system is a bit particular in the sense that you don't have only one author who would be creating a standard. In fact, you have multiple experts coming together in a technical committee, for example, a working group or other technical group, and they together create something which is included in the standard, so the standard content. Sometimes it is not even clear who has contributed what, so it's not possible very often to distinguish what each expert has contributed in the standard. Rather, the standard is a document which is developed under a consensus-based approach, What this means is that there is discussion during technical groups, and together the various experts, they contribute to that. So with that regard, the standards are copyrighted collective works, so made by a set of independent original inputs from the experts. The experts are considered as authors with that regard under the copyrights framework. So under this framework, the experts have the exploitation rights to their identifiable contribution. So at the same time, though, in order to establish the copyright of the CEN-CENELEC publication, a specific framework has been designed in order to allow CEN-CENELEC to establish this copyright on their standards. So how this works is that at the beginning of each meeting and at the attendance form, the experts also are invited to sign what is called an assignment of rights statement. So when an expert goes to a technical meeting, the expert is requested to sign this statement, under which they agree to transfer to CEN-CENELEC the exploitation rights of their individual contributions, if this, of course, is possible to identify. In most cases, it's possible to identify them, but even if that is possible to identify, they transfer these exploitation rights to CEN-CENELEC for the benefit of the CEN-CENELEC members. So we will describe later what that means. I mentioned at the beginning a bit how the system works, but essentially the benefit is for the CEN-CENELEC members, since it's those ones who distribute and disseminate the final deliverables. However, when the experts transfer the exploitation rights to CEN-CENELEC, they still keep the moral rights to their individual identifiable contributions. What this means, moral rights, and this is described also in the assignment of exploitation rights statement. In fact, the experts, they have the ability to use their identifiable contributions. So if there is a contribution that the expert has contributed, and this is identifiable and attributable to this specific expert, then this expert is still able to use this part for their own purposes. For example, experts may wish to use this content because they're doing a research with a university, or they wish to publish a book and they would like to use their identifiable contribution for that purpose. So it doesn't mean that the expert can take any content of the standard and copy it in their book or in a research. What this means is that they can use their contribution, and only if this is identifiable and attributable to them. So if an expert can say, for example, and this is verifiable, of course, that, okay, this is my contribution, it is attributable to me because I know this was part of my previous research and I brought it here, and it is really very clear that I am the one who contributed that, then the expert transfers this exploitation rights to CEN-CENELEC. However, the expert can still use it for any different publication they would like to use, and of course, as far as this publication that they will make is not adversely affecting the content of the standard and the publication and the use of the CEN standards. So this is very, very important. The reason for that is because it is understood in the CEN-CENELEC system that we would like to have the best expertise available. This may mean that research centers, so researchers, for example, other authors or experts who may also wish to use their content in other frameworks as well. As I mentioned, book publications, researches, another type of content. We understand that this may be necessary for their purpose, and this ability is provided in the CEN-CENELEC framework. Now, considering that we're moving in a more digital framework, it is important here to note that due to the changes in the system, in the future, it is foreseen that some of the meetings of the experts are going to take place online. In that context, we're currently addressing that through the adjustment of the system, under which the experts will be requested to sign the assignment of rights statement online in the same way that they have done currently physically during the meetings. We are cooperating at the moment with ISO on how to adjust it, because the systems are similar at the ISO level. I refer to the IT systems and the IT tools, and we're discussing how to adjust it accordingly. To date, normally we have an online system where there is a registration form. However, when the meeting is physical, the experts are still required to sign the statement at the physical meeting. In the future, as I mentioned, the online meetings, there will be a different type of configuration online. So essentially, there will be the same text signed by the expert. However, this will be done online for efficiency purposes. Now, as I mentioned, the CEN-CENELEC Guide 10 is a core text which I would advise you strongly to have a look at. Provides some various information with that regard. An essential principle to that, as I mentioned earlier, is that the standards are being disseminated by the CEN members, so national standardization bodies for CEN and national committees for CENELEC. In the CEN-CENELEC system, we have also a group, dedicated group, which oversees the implementation of the Guide 10 and provides guidance to the governing bodies of CEN-CENELEC whenever there is an issue which needs to be addressed on ad hoc basis. And this is the CEN-CENELEC Joint Commercial Advisory Group, JCAG. This is a very important group which is composed by representatives of the CEN-CENELEC members with expertise on dissemination of European standards. Now, a question which you often receive is, are terms and definitions, graphs, tables, pictures, labels, and stickers protected as copyrights? And the answer is yes. The reason for that is because even in this type of content, this has been established also under case law by various courts in various jurisdictions, there is original creative work to those, so they can be protected as copyrights. Also, for the cases of the terms and definitions, because someone will say, okay, definition, how can it have a creative work? It's a definition in that sense. However, the configuration of the definitions and the terms in the pages of the standards are also protected as copyrights, and this has been established by case law as well. So what this means is that the pages, meaning the arrangement of the publications where they are reproduced, are copyright protected. So this is very important, and be aware of that. Also, tables, graphs, and pictures, labels or stickers in the standard are also protected as copyright. So if any of you would like to use such content, they are strongly advised to seek the authorization of one of the CEN-CENELEC members in order to take a permission to reproduce it. So this means that they cannot be reproduced as such without appropriate permission from the copyright owners. So the fair practice is also an important element. So what does it mean, fair practice? So under Guide 10, you will see there is a provision there which refers to the concept of fair practice, under which an individual or an organization may wish to reproduce a small extract from a CEN standard for non-commercial, educational, or informational purposes. So essentially, the CEN-CENELEC members have granted this possibility in the CEN-CENELEC guide. So whenever a third party, for example, would like to take content, a very small extract from a standard, for example, a graph or a table, for example, in the standard, which is very interesting for them, and they would like to reproduce it, for example, in a non-commercial publication, either for educational or informational purpose. Imagine, for example, could be an academic book for standardization or for another sectorial publication, for example, and they would like to reproduce a content from a small extract. In that case, this is possible, and with appropriate copyright permission, of course. This is done. So whenever there is such request, these are being addressed to CCMC, so the CEN-CENELEC Management Center, and CCMC consults with the relevant technical committees in order to take their opinion and view on that. And then if the conditions are being met, then the permission is granted. By the way, if the requests are arising from organizations which are based in the territories of one of the CEN or CENELEC members, so in Europe, then these requests shall be addressed to the CEN and CENELEC members. If the requests arise from organizations established outside Europe, then these are being addressed to CCMC. So the CEN and CENELEC Management Center considers only requests addressed by organizations established outside Europe, and the reason for that is because the ones responsible for the implementation of the standards and for granting licensing in the territories in Europe are the CEN and CENELEC members individually. So if you want to reproduce content under the fair practice and you are based in one of the countries of the member states, the members of CEN and CENELEC, we advise you to contact one of the members of CEN and CENELEC and request such permission. And then members of CEN and CENELEC apply essentially the same principles, and they are able to grant you, they will be able to grant you this permission if it fulfills this criteria. And of course, there needs to be always copyright acknowledgement. What it means is that whenever this publication will be reproduced, the author of this different publication has to always acknowledge that the content is provided under the permission of CEN-CENELEC or their members and acknowledge this copyright. Now, a further aspect which is being addressed to us often is what happens in the cases where members of CEN-CENELEC are involved in standardization work, which requires part of the work to be subcontracted to another organization. Sometimes there might be some issues there with regard to the IPR ownership of the final deliverables. With that regard, specifically when there are cases of contracts which are being funded under the European Commission or EFTA, it is very important to verify what are the requirements and the conditions for the contract under this framework, basically, and what are the provisions therein with regard to IPR. Also, what is important further to that is that the members need to ensure that the subcontractor and the contract which is being signed are very clear about the terms with regard to IPR ownership, and the copyright of the final standard publications of CEN-CENELEC are not being challenged. What this means is that the terms of such subcontracting works should not create barriers or create problems essentially to the dissemination of the CEN-CENELEC publications later. So essentially, if the final deliverable of a product, of a contract which is being subcontracted is to develop a report, and then this report may need to be included in the CEN standard later, then it has to be clear that the IPR of this report is owned by CEN-CENELEC. This is very important because it ensures that this content can be used later for the publication of a CEN standard to technical specification or technical report as needed. Of course, it is possible in that framework to allow the subcontractors to use this content for their own purposes. So this is also similarly with the experts, for example. If a subcontractor has provided some creative work or they have contributed some work to the development of the standard, and they may need to use part of what they have contributed, what they have created, for their own purposes, for example, because they might be a car manufacturer and they're doing a research to improve the quality of their products, and part of their research they have contributed also to the CEN or CENELEC standardization work. In that context, it is possible to grant them the right to use, like kind of a license to use, but not transfer the full copyrights to that content. It is very important that CEN and CENELEC are able to use any content for the publication of their deliverables. And of course, there is flexibility whenever needed with that regard. Now, why is the copyright important? The copyright is very important because it allows the possibility for CEN and CENELEC and the members to protect the content from misuses. So the example which may relate to you even more, imagine, for example, that someone without authorization from CEN and CENELEC or the members takes some European standards, for example, it could be harmonized standards, Eurocodes, imagine, and they place it on a website online. Maybe this person could decide, for any reason, who knows what happened, they could suddenly make some changes to the content of the standards online. No one can verify the accuracy of this content. CEN and CENELEC cannot verify the accuracy of the content. However, if someone goes online, they download this content, which includes incorrect provisions and clauses in the relevant standards, and they implement it, they may end up in a situation where they will implement the standards in an incorrect way, because what they have implemented is not the authoritative text, but something which is wrong. Therefore, they might end up in trouble, which would cost them a lot in implementation and may even result to legal implications and liability for them and their organization. So it is very important in that case that CEN and CENELEC are able to intervene whenever such things, something like that happens, and be able to raise the copyright ownership against any misuses in order to ensure that such content is not being provided without appropriate authorization, and essentially they protect the users with that regard. Also, the copyright provides an added value and recognition to the standard. At the same time, ISO and IC have the same policy as CEN and CENELEC with regard to copyrights. Therefore, copyright protection ensures alignment at the European and international level. And also, what is very important is that they ensure the sustainability and independence of the system. And the reason for that is, as I will describe later here, is that the CEN and CENELEC standards are being distributed by the CEN and CENELEC members. The reason for that is because they are selling the standards in order to be able to raise the necessary funds and resources to sustain the system and be independent with that regard. So European standardization system is a voluntary system. It is industry driven, and stakeholders are also able to participate in that system in a transparent and open way. However, in order to be able to maintain this independence as a system, the financing is a very critical, a very important aspect, and that's why national standardization bodies and national committees are able to provide the standards at national level. This provides an added value at the same time, because national members of CEN-CENELEC are the natural contact points. They're able to communicate in the national language. They're able to translate the standards in the national language. They can also adjust the content of the standards in annexes to the national context if that is necessary, and they can provide customized support, for example, through advice or services to the implementers and the users at national level. At the same time, there is some flexibility in the CEN-CENELEC system, because some deliverables in the CWAs, by the way, are the CEN or CENELEC workshop agreements. So their type of deliverable, it's not the same level like standard technical specification, technical reports. However, they are a deliverable of CEN and CENELEC in those cases where some organizations wish to develop a technical publication in a specific area themselves. So CWAs in the ICT and R&D domain is possible to be pre-financed, prepaid, and their access will be provided through the CEN or the CENELEC website. So users are able to get access to those at the CEN and CENELEC website if needed. So a final point, I think it's to ensure to also remind you what is the role of CCMC, the CEN-CENELEC Management Center. So CCMC is responsible to ensure the enforcement of the CEN-CENELEC copyrights worldwide, to coordinate with the members, national committees, and other NSBs for the implementation of the CEN-CENELEC commercial policy under Guide 10, and to ensure also that there is a recognition of the CEN-CENELEC intellectual property rights among the stakeholders by promoting the sustainability and good practices of the system. So this is very important. One of the initiatives for that is today our discussion. So some key learning points, as I mentioned, it is very important to ensure that experts are able and need to sign the exploitation rights statement at the beginning of each meeting. Adjustments will be made in the future with regard to the only online meetings. Technical committees are always consulted with regard to the fair practice requests. This is important because technical committees have the expertise and they may raise issues as relevant with regard to that. If the requests come from national territories, please seek the license and the permission from the national members of CEN-CENELEC. If it is from outside Europe, please address this to CCMC. Subcontracted works and IPR is also very important, so pay attention please to that whenever this may arise. And if you have any questions, please address them to us. We will be happy to provide you information and support the members whenever this may arise. And also it is critical to note the benefit of having access to standards through the national standardization bodies and national committees, and then this also ensures the sustainability of the system and independence from any other perspective, while allowing the system to be independent and sustainable and market driven with that regard. So I'm sorry I had